Have you ever watched a father toast his own daughter at her engagement party, then try to rob her in front of 300 witnesses an hour later? No. So picture this. You are standing in the private dining room of the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. 300 guests, senators, surgeons, hedge fund managers, your father's entire surgical residency class, all holding champagne flutes and smiling at you. And your father has just pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of his tuxedo and placed it on the podium next to your engagement gift, a signed bank transfer agreement that would move your $8.4 million trust fund, the one your late mother left you, into a joint family account he controls. He slides a pen across the podium. He smiles the same smile he used on the cover of Boston Magazine last year. And he says, into the microphone, that this is the moment the family becomes whole again. I said no. I said it quietly, into the microphone, with 300 people watching. His jaw set. My stepmother Adrienne reached for my arm from behind, her fingernails digging through the silk of my gown hard enough to leave bruises I would find the next morning. My half-brother Weston stepped between me and my fiancé, physically blocking him from coming to my side, and my father leaned down to my ear and whispered, in a voice so gentle it made my blood freeze, that if I did not sign in the next 60 seconds, I would regret every day of the life I had left. That was November 2nd, 2024. They expected me to cry. They expected me to apologize for the embarrassment and sign. I had been signing things I did not understand since I was 9 years old. Instead, I looked at my fiancé across the room, and I gave him the one small nod we had practiced for 6 months in case this exact moment ever came. He walked out of that ballroom, pulled out his phone, and made one call. 40 minutes later, 2 federal agents in dark suits walked into the Waldorf Astoria. They did not come for me. They came for my father. Because what he did not know, what nobody at that engagement party knew, was that the trust fund he had been trying to seize for 9 years was not actually the thing I was protecting. The trust fund was the bait. The real evidence was a manila envelope that had been sitting in a safe deposit box at a bank in New Haven since I turned 21, and my fiancé was about to deliver it to the only person in the country who could legally act on it. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, please like and subscribe, but only if this story actually means something to you. Comments matter more to me than views, so tell me honestly at the end whether you would have signed or walked. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand why a daughter would set a trap for her own father in front of 300 people, you have to understand what he took from her first. My name is Harper Vance. I am 31 years old. I grew up in a sand-colored colonial in Darien, Connecticut, with a pool that my mother never swam in because she was usually too tired, and a piano that I played every day after school because it was the only room in the house where nobody ever yelled. My mother was Caroline Vance. She was a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital, one of 4 women in the country doing the specific infant procedures she pioneered. She was brilliant. She was exhausted. She was, I realized much later, quietly dying for about 3 years before anyone admitted it, including her. She had early-onset ovarian cancer, diagnosed when I was 7, in remission by 8, back by 9, and gone by the spring I turned 10. My father is Dr. Sterling Vance. He was, at the time of my mother's diagnosis, a fellow in her department, 11 years younger than she was, and the protégé she had personally recruited from Johns Hopkins. He married her the year I was born. He became chief of pediatric cardiothoracic surgery at Yale New Haven 8 months after she died. People called him devoted. People called him tragic. My grandmother, my mother's mother, called him something else. But she waited until I was old enough to understand before she said it out loud. My mother left almost everything to me. Her practice buyout, her life insurance, her portion of the Connecticut house, her research royalties from a surgical technique that hospitals still pay to license. It was set up in an irrevocable trust with a trustee she chose personally before she died, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had been her roommate at medical school and who was now a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. The trust was designed to release in stages: a small monthly allowance during childhood, paid directly to my guardian for my care; a larger stipend at 18 for college; full control at 30. And one specific provision that I did not learn about until much later, a clause my mother had written personally in her own handwriting that allowed the trustee to unseal a sealed supplementary document upon the beneficiary's written request after the beneficiary's 25th birthday. My father married Adrienne Kessler 16 months after my mother's funeral. Adrienne had been the head of pediatric oncology nursing in the same hospital. She had 3 children from a previous marriage. Weston was 8. The twins, Bellamy and Sutton, were 5. Overnight, I went from being an only child mourning her mother to being the oldest of 4 in a house that no longer had a single photograph of Caroline Vance in it. I do not remember the photographs coming down. I remember the day I noticed they were gone. I was 11. I came home from school, and the hallway where the framed picture of my mother holding me as a newborn used to hang now had a watercolor of a sailboat in its place. When I asked, Adrienne said the house was being redecorated in a fresher direction, and that my mother's photographs were being preserved in a lovely album in my father's study. I never saw the album. Years later, looking for a tax document, I found half of the photographs in a plastic bin in the attic, the frames cracked, the glass missing from 2 of them. The first time my father took something from me, I was 9.5, and I did not understand it was taking. My mother's mother, a retired stage actress named Evelyn Marsh, had given me a string of pearls at my mother's funeral. She told me, in the receiving line, that they had been her own mother's, and now they were mine, and no one was to touch them. 2 weeks later, they were gone from my jewelry box. When I asked, Adrienne said they were being appraised for insurance. I never saw them again. 6 years later, at a hospital gala, I saw them around Adrienne's neck in a photograph in the Yale Alumni magazine. I did not say anything. I was 15. I did not yet know what saying something would cost me. The small thefts continued. A savings bond my grandfather had set up for me, cashed out in 9th grade to pay for Weston's private tutor. A college fund my mother's department had raised for me, redirected in 10th grade to the twins' equestrian lessons. My mother's surgical loops, 18-karat gold, custom made, engraved with her initials, which were supposed to come to me at 18 as a graduation gift, quietly given to my father's new resident as a welcome gift the year I was 17. Each time, the explanation was the same. It was for the family. I was being selfish. I did not understand how much everything cost. My mother, had she been alive, would have wanted everyone taken care of. That last one, what my mother would have wanted, became the phrase that defined my childhood. Every piece of her that was taken from me, every memory that was erased, every opportunity that was redirected to my step-siblings, was done in the name of what my mother would have wanted, as if she had left a will naming them, as if they had known her at all. The trust was different. The trust my father could not touch. Judge Margaret Chen sent me a birthday card every year on April 12th. Inside each card, in her small, precise handwriting, was the same sentence: "Your mother is watching you, and she is proud." On my 21st birthday, the card had one extra line: "When you are ready to talk about what your mother left for you, call the number on the back. Not a minute before you are ready." I was 21 years old, a junior at Brown, studying architecture, and I thought I was ready. I was not. I called the number. Judge Chen met me at a coffee shop in Providence, off the record, as she carefully explained, because we were not in her courtroom, and she was not acting as my trustee in that moment, but as my mother's friend. She told me 3 things. The first was that the trust was intact. The second was that my father had petitioned her office 4 separate times since my mother's death to be added as a co-trustee, and she had denied him 4 separate times, the fourth time with a formal reprimand. The third thing was that there was a sealed supplementary document attached to the trust, and that I could request its release any time after my 25th birthday, but that once I requested it, I could never unsee what was inside. I asked her what was in it. She told me she did not know, that my mother had sealed it herself, notarized it with a retired colleague, and given instructions that the contents be released only to me, only in person, only upon my written request. But, she added, stirring her coffee in a way that told me this was the careful part, she had been the one to witness my mother sealing it. And my mother had said, as she sealed it, that she hoped I would never need to open it, that she hoped she was wrong, that she was leaving it in case she was right. I drove back to Brown that night and I did not sleep. I thought about my mother, 39 years old, already in hospice, knowing she had a 7-year-old daughter and a husband she had begun to distrust, sealing an envelope she hoped her daughter would never have to read. I did not request the document at 25. I requested it at 26. The envelope that Judge Chen slid across her desk, in her chambers on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2019, contained 4 things: a handwritten letter from my mother, a photocopied page from a medication log at Yale New Haven Hospital, date stamped March 14, 2003, 6 weeks before my mother's death, a second photocopy of a handwritten note in my father's unmistakable handwriting, ordering a modification to my mother's pain management protocol, and a sworn affidavit from a nurse named Dolores Whitfield, notarized the month before my mother died, stating that she had personally witnessed Dr. Sterling Vance alter medication dosages in Caroline Vance's chart without the oversight of the attending palliative physician, and that when she had raised concerns through proper channels, she had been transferred off the unit within 72 hours. I read the letter first. My mother's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but still hers. She told me that she loved me. She told me she was sorry to leave me this burden. She told me that she had begun to suspect, in the last 6 weeks of her illness, that her husband was speeding her death. Not murdering her, she was explicit about this. The cancer was killing her regardless, but pushing her over the edge a few weeks early, for reasons she believed had to do with her professional estate, and with a woman on his unit whose name she did not know, but whose lipstick she had smelled on his collar. She did not have proof. She had a nurse willing to document what she had seen. She had a photocopy of a dosage order she had personally retrieved from her own chart. And she had me, 7 years old, asleep in the hospice chair next to her bed while she wrote. She did not want me to pursue this, she wrote, unless I had to. She did not want me to grow up hating my father. She did not want to be the woman who, from beyond the grave, destroyed a child's last parent. But if a time came when he turned on me, when he tried to take what she had left for me, when he tried to make me disappear the way he had made her disappear, then I should open this envelope and I should know that I had options. I was 26 years old. I sat in Judge Chen's chambers for 40 minutes after I finished reading. Judge Chen sat across from me the entire time, and she did not say a word. When I finally spoke, I asked her what I was supposed to do with this. She said, "Nothing yet." That the evidence was not strong enough for a criminal case, not 19 years after the fact. That the nurse, Dolores Whitfield, had died of a stroke in 2015. That the hospital's internal records from that period had been purged on a standard retention schedule. That I had a story and a few photocopies, but I did not have a case. But, she added, I had something more important than a case. I had a deterrent. If my father ever came for what my mother had left me, if he ever tried to pressure me or manipulate me the way he had apparently manipulated my mother, then I had the power to destroy him publicly, to destroy his career, to destroy his second marriage, to destroy his standing in the medical community that he had spent 20 years cultivating. I did not have to prove he killed my mother. I only had to make enough people ask the question. She told me to put the envelope somewhere safe. She told me not to tell anyone, not my closest friends, not a therapist, not a boyfriend, not anyone. She told me that my father was a surgeon and surgeons were trained to identify threats and eliminate them, and that I had just become a threat. I put the envelope in a safe deposit box at a bank in New Haven. I did not tell anyone for almost 5 years. I met Julian Park in the fall of 2022. He was a structural engineer, born in Seoul, raised in San Francisco, 8 years older than me, and he did not know my family. That was the first thing I liked about him. The second thing I liked was that when he met my father for the first time, at a Thanksgiving dinner that Adrian had engineered in a final attempt to bring me back into the family orbit, he said very little, smiled politely, and then, in the car driving back to the city, told me that he did not trust my father and that he had noticed Adrian pinch my arm under the table when I had mentioned my mother's name. I started crying. I had known Julian for 6 weeks. I told him everything that night. Everything. The pearls, the loops, the trust, the envelope, Judge Chen, my mother's letter. I watched his face the entire time, waiting for him to decide that I was too much, that my family was too much, that I was not worth the trouble. He took my hand across the console of his car, in the parking lot of a rest stop on I-95, and he told me that from that moment forward I was not alone in this. He asked me, very quietly, if I had a plan. I said I did not. I said I had hoped I would never need one. He asked me to let him help me build one. Over the next 18 months, we built it carefully. Julian was not a lawyer, but he had a structural engineer's brain, which turned out to be exactly the brain needed for this particular problem. He thought in load-bearing walls and failure points. He mapped every financial instrument I owned. He identified which assets my father could theoretically reach through manipulation or legal maneuvering, and which ones were truly untouchable. He convinced me to hire my own attorney, separately from Judge Chen, because Judge Chen was my trustee and could not also be my advocate. He found me an attorney named Priya Raghavan, a former federal prosecutor who now worked in private practice in Manhattan and who specialized in what she called dynasty fraud, the specific category of financial crime committed inside wealthy families. Priya reviewed everything. She looked at the envelope contents. She looked at the trust documents. She looked at every tax return my father had filed in the past decade. She looked at Adrienne's suspiciously well-appointed lifestyle on a nurse administrator's pension. And she told me, in her office on Madison Avenue in March of 2024, that my father had been stealing from me for 20 years, that the theft was quantifiable and prosecutable if I was willing to make it public, and that the trust fund was not his ultimate target. The ultimate target was the envelope. He did not know what was in it, but he knew it existed because Judge Chen had informed him, in the course of his 4th petition to become co-trustee, that an additional sealed document had been added to the trust at my mother's instruction, and that he would never have access to it. He had spent 6 years trying to figure out what was in that envelope. And according to Priya, based on the patterns she was seeing in his recent financial behavior, he had decided that the only way to neutralize the envelope was to own me, to put me under financial and legal pressure so complete that I would never dare release whatever was in it. The engagement party was his move. He had been planning it for a year, and Priya and Julian and I had been planning our response for almost as long. Let me pause here, because I know some of you watching are sitting in the middle of a family that keeps telling you that love means silence, that if you really cared, you would give in one more time. If you have ever been made to feel selfish for wanting to keep the one thing that was actually yours, Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to know what happened when I finally stopped apologizing for existing, keep watching, because the next part is where everything I built came due. My father's proposal for the engagement party came in April of 2024, about 10 weeks after I accepted Julian's proposal at a restaurant in the West Village. My father called me himself, which was unusual. For the previous 6 years, any communication from the Vance household had come through Adrienne, who had styled herself as the family's official correspondence secretary. When his number lit up my phone, I almost did not answer. Harper, sweetheart. His voice was warm in a way I had not heard since I was 9. Your stepmother and I would like to host your engagement party. We want to do it properly. The Waldorf Astoria, November 2nd. We will handle everything. I told him I needed to think about it. I told him I would call him back. I hung up and I called Priya immediately. Priya was silent on the other end of the line for almost a full minute. Then she said, in the flat, careful voice she used when something important was happening, that I should say yes. I told her I did not want to say yes. I told her I had not spent a holiday at my father's house in 6 years, and that the idea of letting him host my engagement felt like handing him a knife and turning my back. She agreed with the metaphor. Then she told me that the knife was the point. That if we said no, he would come up with a different move, something we could not predict and prepare for. If we said yes, we chose the battlefield. We could have attorneys in the room, positioned as guests. We could have documents staged at a bank a few blocks away, ready to be delivered if the evening went the way she suspected it would go. We could, if necessary, coordinate with federal authorities in advance, because Priya had been building a parallel case for almost a year, and the window for arrests was getting closer. Arrests, I repeated. For what? She told me that the trust fund was not the only thing my father had tried to steal from me. That Julian's careful forensic accounting, which Priya had handed to a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, had uncovered something bigger. Over the past 9 years, my father had been systematically forging my signature on a series of documents related to a research patent my mother held jointly with Yale New Haven Hospital. He had been collecting royalty checks that were legally mine, small enough per quarter that I had never noticed them missing from my trust statements, because Judge Chen had only received summary documentation, not the underlying patent accounting, but large enough, over 9 years, to total almost $2.3 million. Money that had funded Adrienne's wardrobe, Weston's college tuition, the twins' horses, and my father's yacht share on Long Island Sound. That was wire fraud, federal wire fraud, across state lines, across institutional lines, with forged signatures, and it was prosecutable independent of anything in the envelope. The envelope, Priya told me, we held in reserve. We did not need it. We had the patent fraud. We had the royalty accounting. We had the signature comparison from a forensic document examiner at a firm in Philadelphia. What we needed was a moment, a specific public moment, where my father publicly committed to another act of coercion in front of witnesses. That would complete the pattern prosecutors needed to charge him not just with wire fraud, but with a second count related to the attempted seizure of the trust. The engagement party, Priya said, was the moment. He would walk into it expecting to seize my trust in a public setting where my refusal would be socially impossible. He would fail. And by failing, in front of 300 witnesses, including 2 federal agents, he would hand us the case. I said yes to the engagement party. Julian and I spent the next 6 months preparing. We acted like a couple planning a wedding. We went to tastings. We argued about flowers. We let my father and Adrienne take the lead on every decision, which they did with enthusiasm. Adrienne brought me fabric swatches. She took me to lunch and told me she had always wanted a daughter. She actually used those words. I almost cracked. Julian held my hand under the table at that lunch, and I steadied. On October 29th, 4 days before the party, Priya called me into her office and laid out the final plan. The two federal agents, Agent Reyes and Agent Tanaka, would be in attendance as guests, seated near the back, wearing formal clothes, indistinguishable from the rest of the room. They would not intervene unless I or Julian signaled. The signal was a specific phrase Julian would text to a designated contact at the field office, who would relay it to the agents in the room. The phrase was, "The blueprint is ready." Once the text was sent, the agents had a maximum of 40 minutes to arrive with a warrant team if the situation escalated to arrest. Judge Chen would not be in the room. She could not be. She was my trustee, and her presence would compromise her. But she would be at her home in Manhattan, 11 blocks away, ready to receive a specific delivery if I requested it. The envelope. The original envelope, retrieved from New Haven the day before, sealed in a courier pouch, held by a second attorney from Priya's firm who would be waiting in a car on Park Avenue with instructions to deliver it to Judge Chen's residence the moment I gave the word. We would not use the envelope unless we had to. Priya was very clear about this. The patent fraud case was strong. The envelope was the nuclear option, the accusation that my father had hastened my mother's death. It could not be proved criminally, but it could be used, if necessary, to destroy him publicly and professionally in a single evening. It was the last card. We would only play it if he made us. He made us. November 2nd. The Waldorf Astoria. 6 p.m. I arrived in a silver silk gown that my grandmother Evelyn had chosen with me 3 weeks before. Her first and only involvement in the evening. She would not be attending. At 82, she said, she no longer had the stomach for watching her son-in-law perform. But she told me, as the fitter pinned the hem, that my mother would be there in the room with me, that I should not be afraid. Julian met me in the lobby. He looked steady. He looked like himself. He touched my wrist, where the tiny silver bracelet my mother had given me at my 7th birthday was hidden under my sleeve, and he said quietly that if I needed to walk out at any point, we walked out. No matter how far in, even if the cake had been cut, even if the speeches had been made. I nodded. The ballroom was beautiful. I will admit that. Adrienne had exceptional taste when she was not using it to decorate over my mother's erasure. White calla lilies, gold chargers, a 12-piece orchestra, 300 guests, many of whom I had never met, almost all of whom were connected to my father's professional world. Yale New Haven department chairs, board members, major donors, 2 senators, the dean of the medical school, a cardiac surgeon who had been profiled by 60 Minutes the previous year. This was not an engagement party for me. It was a coronation for him. Adrienne greeted me with a kiss on both cheeks. She told me I looked radiant. She gripped my upper arm briefly, and I felt her nails press through the silk. A warning, a reminder. She whispered, close to my ear, that she hoped tonight would be a new beginning for our family. I smiled and told her I hoped so too. Weston was there. My half-brother, 29 now, a junior associate at a law firm downtown, already balding in a way that looked eerily like my father. He shook Julian's hand with a grip that was slightly too hard. He told me I looked nice. He asked where my grandmother was. I said she was not feeling well. He nodded in a way that told me he already knew. The twins, Bellamy and Sutton, 26 and tan from whatever Caribbean vacation Adrienne had funded that fall, air-kissed me and then orbited around the edges of the room, taking selfies with people more important than they were. They had not texted me in 4 years. My father made his entrance at 6:45. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. He had colored his hair recently, I noticed, the silver at his temples gone. He worked the room for 30 minutes, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, the king greeting his court. Then, at 7:15, he turned to the orchestra and nodded. The music stopped. The room quieted, and my father walked to the podium at the front of the ballroom. I knew then. I knew from the way he carried himself. From the folded document I saw pressed against the inside of his jacket as he moved. From the way Adrienne, behind me, placed a hand on the small of my back. Firm, ready to guide me forward. I looked across the room at Julian. He was already looking at me. He tapped his phone against his palm. The message was ready to send. My father raised his champagne flute. He welcomed the guests. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about family and legacy and the bonds of love that transcend even the loss of those we cherish most. He raised his glass to my mother, Caroline, whose memory, he said, was present in this room tonight. The audience murmured approvingly. Adrienne dabbed her eye with a napkin. I felt something in my chest turn to steel. Then he invited me to the podium. For a surprise, he said. A gift. A family tradition. I walked the 40 feet between my table and the podium more slowly than I needed to. Julian stood as I passed, the way a groom stands for a bride. His hand brushed mine. The music of the phrase, "The blueprint is ready," played in my head like a metronome. My father put his arm around my shoulders. The document came out of his jacket. He placed it on the podium, next to a pen. "Harper," he said into the microphone. "Tonight, in front of everyone who loves you, I want to offer you something I have been waiting to offer you for a very long time. Reunification. Your mother's trust has been sitting, untouched, for 20 years. It is time, as you enter this new chapter of your life with Julian, to bring it home, to fold it back into the family, where it belongs, where your mother would have wanted it." I looked at the document. It was a transfer authorization, moving the entirety of the trust, $8.4 million, into a joint family investment account held at a bank where, Priya had confirmed for me the week before, my father was the only authorized signer. I picked up the pen. I held it for a long moment. The room was utterly silent. 300 people watching. My father's arm warm and heavy across my shoulders. Adrienne behind me, so close I could feel her breath. I set the pen down, very gently. I leaned toward the microphone, and I said, clearly into the silence, that I was grateful for the beautiful evening, but that I would not be signing anything tonight or any other night, and that my mother's trust would remain exactly where she left it. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. Then my father laughed. It was a stage laugh, the one he used at fundraisers when a donor said something mildly amusing. He turned to the audience and he said, "Harper is nervous." Of course she is. Big decisions, big night. He tightened his arm around my shoulders. Under the tuxedo, I felt his fingers dig into the soft part of my upper arm through the silk. "Sweetheart," he said, not into the microphone this time, but close enough that the front 2 tables could hear it. "Sign the document, now. We are not going to have a scene." I pulled away from him. I stepped back far enough that his arm fell from my shoulders. I turned to face him, not the audience, and I said, at a normal conversational volume that the microphone still picked up, that I had spent 9.5 years watching him take things from me that belonged to my mother, and that tonight was the first night I was telling him no in front of the people he wanted most to impress. The room made a sound I had never heard before. It was not a gasp. It was something smaller and more dangerous, the sound of 300 socially sophisticated people registering that they were about to witness something they would be telling for the rest of their lives. Adrienne moved fast. She was suddenly at my elbow, her hand around my wrist, her voice low and furious. "Harper, darling, you are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing your father. People are watching. Think about what your mother would want." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had taken my mother's pearls and worn them to hospital galas, who had taken my mother's photographs off the walls of my home. who had told me for 15 years that my own memories of my own mother were inaccurate, who had pinched my arm at a Thanksgiving dinner and then told me I was too sensitive. I said, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, that my mother would have wanted me to walk out of this room and never come back, and that was exactly what I was going to do. I turned toward the exit. I took 3 steps. My father grabbed my arm. It was not a gentle grab. It was the grip of a man who had spent 20 years opening rib cages with his hands. It stopped me physically. It pulled me back toward the podium. And for one long, unbroken second, the 300 guests in that ballroom watched the chief of pediatric cardiothoracic surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital physically restrain his adult daughter at her own engagement party. Julian was across the room in 4 steps. Weston intercepted him before he reached me, stepping into his path with the practiced ease of someone who had been blocking people on behalf of his stepfather his entire adult life. Julian did not fight him. He did not need to. He had already sent the text. I saw his thumb come off his phone as Weston blocked him. "The blueprint is ready." My father leaned close to my ear. His voice was the voice I had been afraid of my entire life and had not let myself remember being afraid of until that moment. He said, very quietly, that if I did not sign the document in the next 60 seconds, he would ensure that my grandmother, Evelyn, who was alone in her apartment on 87th Street and who depended on an oxygen concentrator and on the part-time aide he paid for, would not receive her medication delivery in the morning. He said it so calmly. He said it like he was quoting a stock price. He said it with his hand still around my upper arm and his public smile still on his face. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw in that moment what my mother must have seen in the last weeks of her life. Not a monster. Nothing that dramatic. Just a man who had decided a long time ago that other people were problems to be managed and that love was a tool like any other. I said, into the microphone, which was still live, that my father had just threatened my grandmother's life and that everyone in this room had just heard him do it. The ballroom did something I will never forget. 300 faces in almost perfect unison turned toward the podium. Not at me, at him. He released my arm. He recovered fast. I will give him that. He laughed again, but it was thinner. He told the audience that I had always been prone to dramatic interpretations, that I was clearly overwhelmed, that we should all take a moment. He gestured to the orchestra. The orchestra did not start playing. The conductor, a thin man in his 60s, was looking at my father with an expression of frank professional horror. I stepped away from the podium. Julian was beside me again. Weston had fallen back. The crowd parted as we walked toward the exit. I saw Senator Whitmore's wife press a hand to her mouth. I saw the dean of the medical school, who had known my mother, turn to her husband and say something sharp. I saw Agent Reyes at a back table fold her napkin with deliberate precision and stand up. I did not make it to the exit. The double doors of the ballroom opened from the outside. 2 men in dark suits entered, followed by 2 uniformed officers of the NYPD. Agent Reyes crossed the room to meet them. Agent Tanaka, who had been seated near the orchestra, stood and moved toward the podium. The room had gone absolutely silent except for the sound of Adrienne beginning to cry, a high, thin sound that I recognized from every family crisis of the past 15 years, a sound that had always, previously, caused everyone to stop what they were doing and attend to her. Nobody attended to her. Agent Tanaka walked up to my father at the podium. He identified himself. He informed Dr. Sterling Vance that he was under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant for wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate financial crimes. He recited his Miranda rights into the same microphone my father had been using 30 seconds earlier. My father did not resist. He did not speak. He let Agent Tanaka guide his hands behind his back and apply the cuffs. He walked out of that ballroom, in handcuffs, in his $3,000 tuxedo, in front of 3 senators, 4 department chairs, two members of the Yale board, the dean of his own medical school, and the 60 Minutes surgeon, who had just pulled out his phone and was openly filming. Adrienne collapsed into a chair. Weston went to her. The twins were nowhere to be seen. Julian put his arm around my shoulders. It felt nothing like my father's arm had felt. He guided me out of the ballroom, through the lobby, into the cold November air on Park Avenue. I stood on the sidewalk and I realized I was shaking. Not from fear, not from anger, from something I had not allowed myself to feel in almost 20 years. I was shaking from the weight of something heavy finally coming off my back. Priya was waiting in a car. She got out when she saw us. She did not say anything. She just put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me for a long moment, the way my mother used to look at me when I had done something brave and did not yet know it was brave. Inside the ballroom, according to what I was told later by a guest who texted me apologies at 2 in the morning, the reception did not end so much as dissolve. Adrienne had to be helped to a chair by a waiter. The senators left within 6 minutes of the arrest, separately, through different doors, both of them calling their press secretaries from the sidewalk. The dean of the medical school approached Julian, who had gone back inside to retrieve my coat, and asked him quietly, almost apologetically, whether there was anything the school should be preparing to announce on Monday morning. Julian told her, also quietly, that she should assume yes, and that she should speak with Priya Raghavan before the end of the weekend. The dean thanked him. She actually thanked him. Weston tried to follow Julian toward the exit. Weston, whose face had gone the specific shade of gray that lawyers' faces go when they are calculating their own personal exposure in real time, caught Julian's sleeve at the coat check and asked him whether I planned to press any additional charges against the rest of the family. Julian told him, very politely, that he was not in a position to speak for me on that question, and that he would encourage Weston to stop touching his sleeve. Weston let go. Julian told me about it later. He said it was the single most satisfying professional moment of his life, and Julian is an engineer who has watched bridges he designed open to traffic. She told me my grandmother Evelyn was safe. She had already called Judge Chen, who had already sent a private nurse to Evelyn's apartment to stay with her overnight as a precaution. She told me the federal team had frozen all of my father's accessible accounts within the last 90 seconds, pursuant to the warrant, and that he would not be able to make good on any threat he had made tonight. She told me I had done exactly what we had planned. I asked her about the envelope. She looked at me for a long moment. She said the envelope was still in the courier's car, unopened, sealed. She said we did not need it. The arrest would hold. The wire fraud case was strong. My father was finished. Professionally, socially, financially. He would likely plead to avoid trial. He would serve between 3 and 7 years. Adrienne would lose everything that was in his name, which was most of what she lived on. The twins would lose their trust supplements. Weston would keep his law job, probably, if he distanced himself fast enough. We did not need the envelope. I thought about my mother, writing by hand in a hospice bed, sealing something into silence for her 7-year-old daughter to open only if she had to. I told Priya to send the envelope back to New Haven. It stayed sealed. I want to stop here for just a second, because I know that a lot of you watching this have a person in your life who uses the phrase, "What would your mother want?" or "What would your father want?" as a weapon. Someone who weaponizes the dead to control the living. If that person exists in your life, tell me about them in the comments. You are not alone. I read every reply, and I know exactly what that particular kind of tired feels like. Now, let me tell you what happened in the 6 months after my father walked out of the Waldorf Astoria in handcuffs, because the arrest was not the end. The arrest was the moment the entire structure my father had built for 25 years began to come apart, and the speed at which it fell surprised even Priya. By the Monday morning after the engagement party, Yale New Haven Hospital had placed my father on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. By Thursday, They had retained outside counsel to review every surgical outcome he had managed over the past decade. By the following Tuesday, a Boston Globe investigative reporter named Daniel Reeves, who Julian knew from a college alumni network, published the first of what would become a three-part series titled The Surgeon and the Trust, which laid out the patent royalty fraud in devastating detail. The series did not mention the envelope. It did not need to. The paper trail Priya had built was already enough. By the end of November, two of my father's former surgical fellows had come forward to federal investigators with separate complaints about billing irregularities going back to 2016. By mid-December, the Yale board had accepted his resignation, not his administrative leave, his full resignation, effective immediately. By the first week of January, his medical license had been suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case, and 3 medical malpractice suits had been filed by families whose children he had operated on in the previous 5 years. None of the suits alleged the death threats he had made to me. They alleged negligence, poor outcome tracking, and inadequate informed consent. It turned out, once the institution had stopped protecting him, that a number of things had been quietly tolerated for a long time. Adrienne did not fare better. The forensic accounting Priya had assembled traced, in granular detail, how much of her personal spending over 15 years had been funded by money that was legally mine. A civil complaint was filed in January, seeking recovery of assets. Her Palm Beach condo, the one she and my father had purchased with what I now knew was my patent royalties, was placed under a legal hold. Her jewelry, including the pearls I had last seen around her neck in the Yale Alumni magazine, was inventoried by a court-appointed appraiser. The pearls came back to me in February, in a manila envelope delivered by courier, with a tag identifying them as the property of Caroline Marsh Vance, deceased. I held them in my hand for a long time. I did not put them on. I put them in the safe deposit box in New Haven, in the space where the other envelope used to be, and I decided I would give them to my grandmother Evelyn when I saw her that weekend. They had been her mother's before they were my mother's. They were not mine to keep. Weston, to his credit, or perhaps to his calculation, distanced himself quickly. He gave a careful statement to Daniel Reeves for the second Globe article, in which he said that he had not been aware of his stepfather's financial misconduct and that he deeply regretted any role he may have inadvertently played. He kept his law job. He has not contacted me. I am not expecting him to. The twins, Bellamy and Sutton, went quiet, then surfaced on social media in a series of posts about healing and boundaries that made clear they had decided to rewrite the past year as a story in which they were also victims. I blocked both of them. I did not feel cruel about it. I felt finished. My grandmother Evelyn was a different matter. The morning after the arrest, I drove to her apartment on 87th Street. She was sitting in her armchair by the window, in her silk robe. The private nurse Judge Chen had sent was quietly making coffee in the kitchen. Evelyn took one look at my face and she held out her arms, and I went to her the way I had not gone to anyone since I was 9 years old. She was small. She was so small. She smelled like her perfume. She held me and she cried, and she told me that she had waited 21 years for me to come out of that house whole. She told me something I had not known, that she had tried, in the first year after my mother died, to file for grandparent custody, that her attorney had told her she would lose, that my father had standing she could not override, and that fighting him publicly would only make my life harder inside his household. She had backed off. She had sent birthday cards. She had sent Christmas presents. She had taken me to lunch twice a year for almost 2 decades, which had felt, at the time, like token visits from a distant relative. I understood now, sitting in her armchair with her hand in my hair, that those lunches had been her keeping a thread in place across a chasm she could not cross. I told her about the envelope. I told her everything. I had never told anyone in my family, because there was no one in my family I had trusted to tell. She listened. When I was done, she told me that she had known my mother better than my father ever had, that my mother had suspected something in her last weeks, and had told Evelyn, on a phone call, that she was making arrangements. Evelyn had not known what those arrangements were. She had waited, all these years, in case a day came when I mentioned them. I had never mentioned them. I had protected her from them, the way I had been protecting everyone from them since I was 26. She asked me what was in the envelope. I told her. She closed her eyes for a long time. Then she told me I had done the right thing to let it stay sealed. That some truths, even true ones, do more damage in daylight than they do in a safe. That the patent case was enough. That my mother, who had sealed that envelope herself, had written on the outside of it, in pencil, the single word, only. Only if she had to. I had not noticed the pencil marking when I had first opened it. Judge Chen had, years ago, and had said nothing, because my mother had asked her to say nothing. I kept the envelope sealed. I keep it sealed still. It is in the safe deposit box. I have not opened it since the day I was 26. I will not open it again. My father pleaded guilty on May 14th, 2025. He took a plea deal that spared him a trial in exchange for full restitution and a prison sentence of 5 years and 3 months at a minimum security federal facility in Otisville, New York. I did not attend the sentencing. Priya went in my place. She told me on the phone that evening that when the judge asked my father if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, he said, briefly, that he was sorry for the pain he had caused his family. He did not name me. He did not apologize to me. He apologized in a grammatically vague sentence to his family, as a category, the way a CEO apologizes to stakeholders. I was not surprised. Something happened 3 weeks before the sentencing that I have not told many people about. Adrienne came to see me. She did not call ahead. She showed up at the door of my apartment in the West Village on a Saturday morning at 9:45, in a coat I recognized as one she had bought with my money, her hair uncombed for the first time I had ever seen in my life. I watched her through the peephole for a long moment before I opened the door. Julian was in the kitchen. He heard me pause. He came to stand behind me as I opened the door, not close enough to interfere, just close enough that she could see him. Adrienne did not cry. I had expected her to cry. I had prepared myself for the performance. Instead, she stood in my doorway and she looked at me, and she said that she had come to tell me she was sorry. Not for anything specific. She did not acknowledge any specific act. She was sorry, in the abstract, for how things had gone. She wanted me to know she was sorry. She also wanted me to know that the twins had not known, that Weston had not known, that she herself had not fully known what my father was doing with the money, although she had benefited from it, and she acknowledged that, and she hoped I could find it in my heart someday, when I was ready, to have some kind of relationship with her and the children, because we were still, she said, family. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, I asked her one question. I asked her whether she had known that my mother's pearls were mine when she wore them to the Yale Gala in the spring of 2012. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the floor. She said that she had assumed they had been given to her fairly. I told her that my grandmother Evelyn had told her, at my 13th birthday dinner, with me present, that those pearls had been left to me at my mother's funeral. I told her that she had nodded and thanked Evelyn for the clarification and continued wearing them. I asked her if she remembered that conversation. She said she did not. I told her I did, and that I had been 12 years old, and I had not said anything, because I had learned by then that saying anything in my own home was not safe. I told her that I was not going to have a relationship with her. I told her that I was not angry, exactly, anymore, but that I understood her now, and that understanding her was not the same as welcoming her, and that I wished her no specific harm, but I also wished her no specific closeness. I told her that the twins and Weston were adults who could reach out if they wanted to, and I would make my own decisions about each of them separately, based on how they behaved. But she and I were done. She nodded. She did not argue. I think she had known what she was going to hear before she came. I think she had come because she needed, for herself, to say the words she had come to say, not because she expected the outcome to be different. She turned and she walked down the hallway to the elevator. Julian closed the door behind her. I sat down on the floor of the entryway and I cried for about 20 minutes. Julian sat with me. He did not try to fix it. He just sat. The money that came back to me in restitution was substantial. 2.3 million in forged royalties, plus interest, plus additional assets traceable to the fraud. Priya arranged the distribution. I used a portion of it to endow a scholarship in my mother's name at Yale School of Medicine for women entering pediatric cardiothoracic specialties, with a preference for first-generation medical students. The first scholarship will be awarded next year. I used another portion to pay off Julian's graduate school loans, which he accepted, after a long argument, only because I framed it as a gift to both of us, which it was. I used the rest to buy a small brownstone in Cobble Hill that I am renovating myself, room by room, on weekends. It is the first home I have ever owned. I married Julian in June, 6 weeks after my father's sentencing, in a small ceremony in my grandmother Evelyn's apartment. There were 11 guests. Judge Chen officiated. Priya was my matron of honor. Evelyn walked me across her living room in a cream-colored suit that had been her own mother's, a hand-me-down from a woman I had never met, which felt, in that moment, exactly right. I wore the pearls, just for the ceremony. I took them off afterward and I put them back in the safe deposit box. They are still there. They are still hers. I was just borrowing them for the afternoon. I am sitting now in the kitchen of the brownstone in Cobble Hill. The renovation is about halfway done. The light in the afternoon is exactly the light I wanted when I picked this house. Julian is upstairs, working on a drawing for a bridge project in Queens. My grandmother Evelyn is coming for dinner on Sunday. I started therapy in December. My therapist's name is Dr. Naomi Levinson, and she has taught me, among many other things, that there is a difference between forgiveness and peace, and that peace does not require forgiveness. I have made peace. I have not forgiven. I may never. I am not sure I need to. I want to tell you one last thing before this ends, because I know, if you are still watching, that you did not come here for a story about a trust fund. You came here because something in this story sounded like your story. Maybe it was the small thefts that were not called thefts. Maybe it was the dead parent being used to justify living cruelty. Maybe it was the feeling of being the one in the family who was told over and over that you were the problem, when in fact you were the only one seeing clearly. If that is you, I want you to hear this. You are not selfish for keeping what is yours. You are not cruel for telling the truth. You are not ungrateful for refusing to fund the life of a person who spent your childhood stealing from you in small increments. Protecting the inheritance a dead parent left you is not a betrayal of that parent. It is the honoring of them. My mother did not seal an envelope for me and set up a trust with a federal judge because she wanted me to be generous with my father. She did it because she loved me, and she knew what he was, and she wanted me to survive him. And I did. If this story meant something to you, tell me. Tell me in the comments. Tell me the phrase your family used to make you small, so we can all read it together and remind each other that we heard what we heard. Subscribe, please, if you want more of these. There is one more button I will never ask you to press, which is the one that asks you to sign something in front of a crowd because you are afraid to say no. Say no. Say it quietly. Say it clearly. Say it once. Then walk. Take care of yourselves. I will see you soon.